Hello everybody, this video is designed to help you out with the Aleks assignment over Pythagorean theorem, and I'm going to do 4 of the questions today, so 4 out of the 7, so that should help you with your assignment if you're kind of struggling with those. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start on lesson 1, and with the Pythagorean theorem, remember we're always going to be using this formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And just as a reminder, a and b represent the two sides that make up the right angle. So that would be a and b. And then that third side, that is called the hypotenuse. That is what c is, and that is the longest side of the triangle. Okay, so that's the Pythagorean theorem. And we're going to use this idea to figure out these third sides that we're missing. Okay, so for number 1, notice we're given both of the legs, right? Both sides that make up the right angle are given to us. So since these are the legs, these are going to represent A and B. Now, it doesn't matter which one's A and which one's B. It just matters that they are set for A and B and not C, okay? So if I plug in what I know, I'm going to use 20 for A, so that would be 20 squared plus 15 squared equals c squared, right? Because I don't know c, that's just what x is. And you could replace it with x if you want. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as c because that helps. So if I go through and multiply everything out, I know that 20 squared is 400. And then I have 15 squared, which I know is 225. And then c squared, I can't do anything with that yet, so let's leave it as c squared. So I have 400 plus 225, and that gives me 625, which equals c squared. And I have one last step because I'm not looking for c squared. I am looking for c. So in order to get rid of this exponent of 2, in order to get rid of that, I have to take the square root. But whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Right, so if I take the square root of 625, that should give me 25. Right, and that's going to represent my third side, C, which is my hypotenuse. Okay, so my answer for that one would be 25. So that is how you would do a question if you're given both of the legs. Now, question like number, one sec. So if I go to the next question, like number 2, this time I'm only given one leg and the hypotenuse. So I'm still going to be using the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It just depends on where I plug in now. Now, I can go ahead and plug in 11 for A if I want. I could plug it in for B, and it doesn't matter. You can do that every single time. You can always plug it in for the same one if you would like. You just have to make sure that it's a leg. All right, so I'm given one of the legs and the hypotenuse, right? So my equation is going to look like 11 squared, because I'm going to plug in 11 for A. So 11 squared plus B squared, I don't know my other leg, equals C squared, and I know that C is 13. So now I can start to solve. I know 11 squared is 121 plus B squared equals 13 squared, which I know is 169. And now I have this equation, right? I couldn't evaluate b squared yet. And now I have an equation. Remember, we have to get b by itself. In order to get b by itself, think about what you have to get rid of. You have to get rid of the 121. Well, how do you get rid of it? You subtract it, right? So I subtract 121 on both sides, and I'm left with b squared equals 48, right? And I'm not done yet. Okay, 48 is not my final answer because I have this exponent of 2. And remember, how do we get rid of the exponent of 2? Well, we take the square root. And we have to do that on both sides. So I get b equals, and then if I take the square root of 48, it's going to be a really long decimal. So now that's where I have to go back to the directions that say round my answer to the nearest hundredth. That's the key right there, hundredth, right? So if I round this to the nearest hundredth, that's going to be 6.2. Okay, so that would be my answer for number 2. And that'll help you out with number 3 as well. Okay, number 3 will be very similar to that. So if I go to the next one, okay, so on number 4 and 5, you're having to figure out if they are right triangles. And just as a little bit of a heads up, you will not answer any of these with not enough information. Okay, there is always enough information here to figure out if it's a right triangle. So none of these will be answered with this column, all right? So you don't even need to write that there. Okay, you can figure out if it's a right triangle given the 3 sides. The way you do that is that you know the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So what you just do is you plug in what you know. You take the 2 smaller sides and plug them in for a and b, and the largest side is your hypotenuse, so that will be c. So in this case, I'm going to take 4 squared plus 7 squared and see if that equals 8 squared. So if I keep going, if I figure this out, well, 4 squared is 16, 7 squared is 49, and 8 squared is 64. And if I do 16 plus 49, you will get 65, which is not equal to 64, so that is not a right triangle. So for that one, that would be not a right triangle. Okay, and I would keep going, okay? So my second one, I would do 15 squared plus 20 squared, and I would see if that equals 25 squared. Well, 15 squared, 15 times 15 is 225, and 20 squared is 400, so 225 plus 400, and 25 squared is 625, and if we notice, 625 does equal 625, so that is a right triangle. And if you remember, it's actually a very familiar question that we've already done this video. And I can keep going. I just have to keep plugging those into that formula and figure out if they're a right triangle. If they're equal, it's a right triangle. If they're not, it's not a right triangle. But there will always be enough information as long as you have 3 sides. Okay, so questions 4 and 5, you will have to do that, okay? And the last questions that you have to do are the word problem questions. Now, these are very similar to the ones in the book, but there's nothing new here. You're given a right triangle, and you have to figure out the third side using the Pythagorean theorem. So I have a shadow from a building, and the distance of this shadow is 27 meters. And the distance from the top of the building to the shadow is 34 meters. And we want to figure out how tall is the building based on that information. Okay? So, using the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, I know that my legs of my right triangle are going to be these 2 legs that make up the right angle. So, I don't know A in this case since I labeled it as such, and then B is going to be 27, so 27 squared equals 34 squared because 34 is going to be my hypotenuse. So now I can go through and evaluate what I know. So 27 squared, so I don't know A squared, but I do know that 27 squared is 729, and 34 squared is 1,156, and now I can start to solve. Remember, to get a squared by itself, I have to get rid of 729. In order to get rid of it, I do the opposite, so I subtract, and in this case I get a squared, right? These cancel. A squared equals 427. And then my last step, I have to take the square root to get a by itself. So I get a equals, and then the square root of 427. And it says to round your answer to the nearest tenth. And in this case, it would be 20.7. And then my unit is meters. Okay, so 20.7 meters. Okay? Number 7 is very similar, where you have a word problem to solve. And so through all of these, you're going to be using the Pythagorean theorem. So just a lot of practice using that. Only 7 questions on this. And if this video wasn't quite enough and you need some more help, please let me know. Send me an email and I'll do what I can. There will also be my office hours tomorrow, and you can join that if you have any questions, okay? So I hope you're doing well, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks.